Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, I'm going to try my hand at making a build video. And likely not what you're thinking of, having heard that word if you have watched any Division content ever, but what I would like build videos or build guides to be. And as such, it's going to be so different that I'm not going to call them build guides or build videos. It's going to be called masterclasses, as I feel it's going to be more akin to that. It's going to be quite long. It's likely going to be very in-depth and likely also very rambly, as I tend to be. For today's subject, I have chosen the Fire Eclipse, as that is one of the builds that I'm most confident with. It's what I run for most of my groups. I'm usually the dedicated Fire Eclipser, and I specifically say Fire Eclipse to differentiate it from Foam Eclipse, and Foam Eclipse is more of a build based around foam and more for legendaries, and has a somewhat different playstyle and quite a different build layout. So just to keep this video a little bit shorter, I'm going to only talk about Fire Eclipse and Heroic and below. As such, it's only going to cover fire. It's not going to cover any legendary tactics and such, but I feel otherwise it would be too long. I'm going to split this up into several chapters. The first chapter is mostly going to be me going over the build, the layouts, the stats I use, what skills I use and recommend, what weapons can work and I recommend. And it's going to be quite in-depth and cover a lot of things. It's also going to touch on specializations that can work with this build. It's also going to cover several builds itself, because I feel just showing one build is actually not that useful. You want to see variations on it and how you can change stuff to make it more personal and work more for your playstyle, as many people are quite different in how they run Eclipse. Secondly, it's going to go into a chapter with tactics. And in that chapter, I'm going to be at the firing range. I'm going to show you a few of the things that I feel you need to know for sure. And I want to separate those out into that, just so I'm certain that I can impart that knowledge to you. It's going to be mostly basically gameplay tips and tricks to how to use some of the talents that I do, some of the skills that I do. And it's going to then go into a chapter for gameplay. And in that, I'm going to random matchmake into missions, and I'm going to narrate, as I feel that that is one of the missed parts in a lot of Division content nowadays. Is a lot of people will talk about builds, but they will not talk about how to play them. And honestly, how to play them is usually more important than what the build is, because if you have the build but you do not know how to use the build, it's actually not very useful. And as anybody who has ever played and talked at the same time, that may be a little bit interesting and maybe worse than my good gameplay, but I feel it will add enough by doing it that way that it's going to be worthwhile. Markers will be for all of those, so you can jump around on the video if you want to on YouTube, and I also recommend actually doing that and watching it in segments or such, because yes, this will be long again. I will use one tool very extensively, so I want to introduce it separately, and that is my build collection, which is also the thing that I'm mostly known for. It is a collection, it is a Google folder, and in there is a collection of Google drawing files, and every file that you see here is a build. And for instance, if I bring up a build that I'm going to show in a few seconds, you can see that from this build picture, which is one of the files there opened, is you can see what the build layout is, but you can also see all of the stats that I'm using. For some of the builds, for instance, for this, there's some extra information like what skills I recommend and what their stats will be. So you can kind of benchmark yourself against what I have here. For some more red builds, I will have damage values and such. If I feel any information is needed, I will basically usually just plaster it somewhere. but the basic layout will be the same across all of them, making it easy to parse once you understand one. These aren't that useful for newer players, as they require you to know basically what stuff is. But for more advanced players, they can look at this and go, okay, I can copy this exactly and at least have a basis. And if I want to change something, I will do that so after. For newer players, I do have a recommended build list, which is that file up there. Opened, it looks like this. And in it is a lot of, it's a curated selection of the builds. And it starts off with builds recommended for newer players, and then parts of builds that I find effective, and with a preamble of how they play. Not all my builds are made to be effective. While these are all my loaded stats in-game, how they are filled in. Some builds are only for testing, some builds are only for raid, some builds are only really for legendary, and some builds are stuff that no sane person should make. But if you are insane and want to join us in the purple gangs, yeah, these are weird stuff that you can make, and they are very fun to make, and nice and challenging to play. But they will not, they do not come instantly recommended. So if you are newer, stick to this recommended list, even though those purple builds are in here actually, but they are very clearly embarked on that they are for fun, and you should not pick those to start off with. As I will be using that tool a lot, I felt it was needed to have that little introduction. And now let's move on into the build itself. So the build I'm going to firstly start off with is the build that you saw a second ago in the game. Here it is on its sheet. I can make it a little larger. You can see that all of the stats are there, all of the information is there, and I will of course link to everything that I'm using here so that you can copy it for yourself. It will be both the collection and all of these sheets that I will show in this video. If I move over to in-game, the Eclipse gear set is a set based around status effects, and its special is that it will on kill, it will spread status effects to nearby enemies. That means that anything, in practical terms, it means that basically anything you set on fire, if you or any of your teammates or for any reason they die, it has the target just needs to die. It doesn't need to be you. Then the status effect will transfer to all nearby enemies, and in this case it's going to be within 10 meters for 50% duration for just the 4-piece. And that leads me also into, this is the recommended loadout for this. And that is that to have a Val mask as the exotic, to have the chest of Eclipse, to have the backpack of Eclipse, and to have a golden piece, and then 2 other gear set, Eclipse gear set pieces to reach the 4 sets bonus. Now, this is the layout I would recommend as the baseline for Eclipse. This is the Eclipse Eclipse that eclipsed. You can do it in different ways as well, but this would be my baseline Eclipse, and I'm going to also refer to it as that, as the baseline. As such, you can see that I'm using the chest, the backpack, and the Vow, as I said, to show you what the backpack does as well. It amplifies all damage to status affected targets by 30%. Well, you will be applying a lot of status effects to almost all targets, so you personally have 30% increased damage against everything, which includes your status effects, but also your weapons and any source of yours that exists. The chest increases the range from 10 to 15 meters. That is a radius, so it is 20 meters in a circle. And it increases the transmission from 50% to 75%, which also is very important because the duration is one of the factors of your damage. And that is why both the chest and the backpack come highly recommended. You will see me show two variants that do not have, one doesn't have the chest, one doesn't have the backpack, but there are, I will specifically point out why that is when we reach that point. The vial as the exotic, so all gear sets, you usually want to go for the 4-piece. If you don't know what you're doing, always go for the 4-piece. There are reasons for some gear sets to not go 4-piece, but usually by the point that you will choose to go not 4-piece on a gear set, you also already know why that is the case. But for Eclipse, for especially a fire Eclipse like we have here, it is based on the 4-piece set. That leaves 2 other slots that can be freely filled in. You can only have one exotic gear piece equipped at a time, and the vial does that for all of my fire eclipses, and it is also comes highly recommended for fire eclipses. As how the vial works is that whenever you apply a status effect to an enemy, it will add to it by adding its own damage over time debuff for 10 seconds. I'm going to shorten damage over time to just dots. If you have not heard that term before, or you didn't know what it was, that's damage over time, dots. So its dot will apply as soon as you status affect an enemy. So it's doing its own damage alongside your fire damage, in the case for here. And it isn't the biggest damage dealer, but it will be a significant part of your damage output. So anywhere between 15 to 20% over a run will be from a vial, and that is significant enough to use it in that gear slot. Now, having 4 pieces and an exotic, you have 1 slot remaining. And for all of my fire eclipses that I will show, it will be filled in by Golem brand gear piece. Now, the position of this golem is can be either gloves, the knee pads, or a holster. It does not need to be the gloves. It can be any of these 3 slots without really impacting anything. All 3 slots are basically the same. 2 of them need to be Eclipse, and 1 of them is free to be something else, in this case, golem. And golem comes highly recommended because it's going to have 10% status effect. I will touch on this, what all of the stats do, in a minute, but this has status effect, and status effect is your important stat. Now, the downside of it is it will always drop with a blue core, meaning that you have to find a piece that has both of the stats that you want, so you can recalibrate the core to not be blue and recalibrate it to a yellow in this case. And that means that you will not find a piece likely that is fully perfect in one go and 1 recalibration is good. You will likely need to optimize. Even in my very long playtime, you can see that, yeah, this is an optimized piece. I probably do have 1 perfect piece on one of my characters somewhere probably, but yeah. So that makes it an expensive piece for newer players, and it makes it a harder piece for newer players. So the other 2 brands that you can use here is Wyvern and Hanayu. Wyvern has skill damage as its first brand bonus, and Hanayu has skill haste as its first brand bonus. And both of those stats are also very useful to you. To actually go into what stats to pick, you will see that especially if I go over to that build picture, you will see that on every piece, I have status effect, and status effect is your most important stat. And status effect applies to all status effect skills, but it always applies to usually the more useful parts of it. So in the case for a fire cam, it's going to apply to burn damage, and it's going to increase our burn duration. Both of those are your primary damage dealing stats, basically. So you always, maybe not always, but you want to go for status effect if you can. So in this case, all of my pieces absolutely have status effect, and then I can put other things alongside it. So one of the options that you have is to put skill damage alongside it, as I alluded to with Wyvern being an option. But Wyvern only increases burn damage, and by the same amount as status effect per point. So if you have 10 status effect, you increase this burn damage by the same amount as you would when you have 10 skill damage. What skill damage also applies to in this case is this damage up here, and that damage is the ignition of the cloud. So when I put the cloud on the ground, when I ignite it, that moment of ignition, that initial damage, that is what skill damage applies to. But skill damage, of course, does not apply to any skills that do not have any damage at all, and as such is not recommended as soon as you have a secondary skill that isn't dealing damage. And therefore, the other piece is actually a little bit more recommended in HANA U, and that's because the stat of skill haste is actually what I feel this build is lacking the most. You want to have a lot of skill haste just so you can regenerate your skills a lot faster. And that is always also one of the points of debate is on the golden piece. As you see here, I have skill haste and status effect. The other option that many prefer and state outright as being better, which I do not agree with. I feel it's a choice. You have the choice to make here. And that is to put a skill damage alongside this, just so you deal a little bit more damage. It, as I showed, it increases your burn damage by a little, same as status effect would. But I feel that actually the biggest weakness of all Eclipses, including Fire Eclipse, is that they do not have much skill haste. And as such, I prefer skill haste. You will see me use almost exclusively skill haste, meaning that I also, for all 3 of the mod slots where status effect and such does not exist as a mod, I have skill haste in there. The other option for mods is skill duration, but skill duration does not apply well to the primary skill that I'm going to be using, Firecam, in which that they only increase the cloud duration on the ground. Some people believe it increases burn duration, but you can just test and check with its stats even and test in game that it doesn't. So for me, the only option for mods is really only skill haste, and that lays out a little bit how that build is laid out. As you can see, I have status effect on every single piece, and then every second place that I can put any stats, in this case mods and this golem piece, I have skill haste. And I prefer that skill haste a little bit as well. As you can see here, the ammo cooldown is 17.3 with a skill damage roll on the golem piece. If that skill haste was not there and was a skill damage instead, this 17.3 would become a 18.4 or 6. I should have looked it up, but I did not. But it's, so that is a second longer per ammo. Now that may feel or seem insignificant. I will feel the difference. I know I feel the difference because I have tried it out. But it's also, of course, it's such a tiny difference that, yeah, you can make the case of bumping up your burn damage a little bit more. But also, to me, that part is, again, optional. You can, it is a choice. It is up to you what you want. Because also, yeah, the burn damage increase is also pretty insignificant in the large scale, in the large picture. Now, to move on to the skills that I use, there is some debate on what fire skill to use. I will push you real hard towards the fire cam launcher, fire starter cam launcher, to say its full name. I will shorten that to Firecam. Firecam is, to me, the best skill that a Fire Eclipse can use. And it is completely down to one factor, and that is ammo. The Fire Chem has 8 canisters that it can store up to, basically. And you can fire 8 in quite rapid succession if you want to. But what this also means is I don't have to wait out a full 17 seconds cooldown here before I have the option to set another wave on fire. Meaning that if there is 4 waves in a room, I can set all 4 waves on fire. Now, as I touched on the stats and such, the damage comes from skill damage. The burn damage comes from skill damage and status effect, and its burn duration comes from status effect. This cloud duration is what I was talking about earlier with skill duration. That is what that affects. To move on to its mods, actually, real quickly, you will see that I have the +1 mod, a +1 ammo mod, as nothing else in this here is as effective as it. As you can see, you have the option of going skill haste, but you lose a charge, and you gain 1.2 seconds. But that charge there is basically worth this whole ammo cooldown's worth of a charge, basically. So I prefer to go with +1 ammo, as do most. This you can choose to, but I recommend the +1. The other ones, duration here, you can see this is the same as what skill duration would apply. And yeah, that is not worthwhile at all. Radius is somewhat worthwhile, but it's such a tiny improvement that it isn't. What you want to have in that other slot is burn strength. Burn strength, if I remove it, you can see it's applying to burn damage and burn duration. That's what is called burn strength, and not just burn damage or something. It's applying to both of those stats. And so burn strength is the one you want in that slot, as this damage is, again, that cloud damage. And that cloud damage is a significant part of your fire. It is just that initial ignition, the initial explosion, if you will, of the cloud. And yeah, that isn't important at all. You want your burn duration and your burn damage as your primary stats to go for. Moving on, the Stinger Hive. You will see that in when I go into the variants in a second, I always use the Stinger Hive. But this is a skill that requires you to have some knowledge, and it's a more advanced skill. In the gameplay part, it will become crystal clear why I use this. And it's mostly down to it can do area denial. It can do, it can flush enemies into positions that I want them to go into. So funneling enemies, basically. And at points, it can also basically delete a wave. And I will use that on waves that I feel most, especially random matchmate groups, forget about and aren't ready for. And as such, I will single out several waves per mission that I basically use the hive for, to either completely decimate them or weaken them enough that they aren't a big challenge. And as such, I feel this is actually the best second skill, but maybe not starting out. So starting out, you would have the options of several other skills. I will go through all of the skills that can be used basically with Eclipse, especially as its secondary, in a second. But I feel quite strongly about the Stinger Hive, and I would also recommend you to try it out at the very least and try to get good with it. And same with the Firecam. The Firecam also requires you to learn it a little bit, and you will see that in the gameplay. And you can see how strongly I kind of feel about the Stinger Hive, as yes, I do have it expertise up to 20. I do not recommend doing this unless you are truly a little bit higher in your journey, but use that mostly for your weapons. But yeah, I have both the Firecam and the Stinger expertise to 20 because I do play Eclipse that much. To go into the mods real quickly, there is, in this slot is the important one of this one, just like the same as the +1 ammo. You really want to have a mod with +4 Stinger. This one doesn't matter much. I put duration, neither is really a significant amount, and also not a significant stat. And damage is the other one that you really want to have, and that increases your first hit damage. And to explain as well, with the Stinger Hive, it's the same basic principle as the Firecam. The damage and bleed damage do get increased from skill damage, but bleed damage and bleed duration gets increased by status effect. Now, this means that this initial hit damage isn't actually getting affected by most of my status effects, but I use it more as a tool for funneling and such than really a direct damage dealer. And for me, it deals still enough damage to be worthwhile to use. The bleed is actually pretty insignificant in the grand scheme of things. It's uh, uh, about the same value as the Val, a little bit less actually, but it's also doesn't have the uptime of the Val. The Val will trigger on every status effect application. This will only apply affect enemies that you have hit with a stinger. So this may basically be like, let's say 7 to 10% of your final output by the end of the mission. But yeah, you will see in the gameplay especially how I use it and why I use it. You want to have especially full. You can see that I actually, even with my playtime, I do not have a 5% on this one. I do have on most of my other characters, but I actually just now noticed that I don't. To go to all of the other skills, I will not go through their mods. You can kind of infer. I wanted to specifically touch on those mods because I will use those skills a lot. For the rest, you can kind of make educated guesses or ask in the comments. So the other skill that usually gets used as the fire in the Fire Eclipse is the Burn Sticky Bomb. Now, the Burn Sticky Bomb is actually a longer duration and is a stronger fire. But its downside is, and why I never use it, I will outright say never, is this 17.8 second cooldown. That cooldown is too long for me for how I play Eclipse. I will try to put a fire on every wave that spawns. I cannot do that with this skill. And that is why, again, but this skill is easier to use. I will admit that. It is very easy to use. It has a very quick firing time. It has a very quick travel time, which is an issue with the fire cam for intercepting enemies especially. It's so much easier with this, but it's just not the same amount of fire. And for me, I do not care as much about how much or how high damage my fire is. I care more about every wave needs to be on fire. And this skill cannot do that. Moving on to the EMP Sticky, this one is a disrupt, of course, and it is a very strong disrupt. It's stronger than the other ones. It is single target, but you can leave it on a target and it will keep disrupting it. And disrupt is a very strong status, especially against Black Dusk, where it will also disable their dogs and their mini tanks, but also even against other factions, it will disable turrets, it will disable RC cars, drones, stuff like that. It's very useful actually as a having it in your second slot next to your cam, but I would prefer the scanner, the pulse disruption, as I will show in a second. Moving on to the shock trap. The shock trap is the only skill that can apply shock, as well as the hive. This is somewhat of a fire and forget skill. So the nice thing about the hive is I toss it, it goes into an area, it basically damages everything in that area. This shocks everything in that area, but for positions only once. So once enemy triggers a trap, that location will become cleared, that trap will explode. And shock is a very strong status effect. It will completely disable any enemy type, even dogs, where they do not get affected by some of the other status effects. It is a very short duration in comparison, shock duration in comparison to other skills, but it is a good CC skill. And you should always try out all the skills, not even in the context of Eclipse, but just in the context of even red builds. Try out a lot of the skills and see what works for you. So this is my more preferred way of applying disruption, especially in PvE and especially in missions, which is a pulse, jammer pulse, and this applies it in a radius around you, and it is you press and hold the button to charge it up, and in doing so, you build it up, and then you release it at whenever it has encompassed all of your enemies. It is a less long disruption, but it is much easier to use. And it is a cooldown that is, you can quite easily do it at the start of a room and then for the last wave of a room. And that is also important. Cooldown is actually pretty important. And then that's again why I go the skill haste for that slots. Now, foam is of course here. I'm just going to touch on it very shortly, but we cannot use it because I will use the Firecam launcher, and I encourage you to do the same. But what you can do is put the foam in there, put the burn sticky as your fire. But I do not like that setup for heroic. Of course, foam is much stronger than fire for legendary and above, and that's because legendary enemies and above have their well, all enemies actually, especially elites, have their own resistance to fire. You will see them burn less even on normal, but especially legendary enemies have so much resistance to fire that a burn of 12 seconds of here is going to be a lot shorter. It's going to be 3 to 5 seconds depending on enemy type. And that makes fire basically unusable on legendary, and foam becomes the choice. But that also requires a different build layout that I'm not going to touch on today, but you can find those builds. Legendary eclipses are, legendary foam eclipses are, yeah, there are guides everywhere. I do not actually have one in my collection, and I will add one just as a separate picture at the bottom, because I will often alter one of my fire eclipses to become a foam eclipse when I need them. So I have the backpack and the mask that I would use for it, and eclipse pieces to cover up for that. I have all that in my stash, so I can quickly, from any of my characters, I can swap them towards being foam eclipse. But yeah, you cannot use foam and fire together, or foam chem and fire chem together. You can only have one of these skills up at a time. And I prefer the fire chem so much that I will not be using foam. The Blinder Firefly is also a really good skill. It is somewhat easy to use, especially starting out, together with actually a skill that I skipped. I will go back to in a second, the Banshee. These would be the two. This is one of the two recommended skills starting out. If you're only going to use fire and not use a stinger, I would use a fire and a Blinder Firefly, or I would use a fire and the skill that I will show you in a second, the Banshee Pulse. And that is because blind is a very strong effect. It disables enemies quite strongly. They can still fire, but even more so than them being on fire or disoriented, they are completely ineffective to return fire. They will stumble around. They will do the standing, where disorient will make them hunch over, meaning if they have chest high cover, they kind of go behind it, which makes it harder to shoot for your allies. But blind, they will stumble while standing, and in doing so, they are pretty easy to shoot. Also, duration is very high. The cooldown is a bit long, especially because also the cooldown doesn't start until your Firefly has completely gone out of the game world. So it's flight time going around blinding everything has to be added to this cooldown, but it's still a really good starter skill because you can just target a few enemies, toss it, and just forget about it, and then you just start working on your fire, and you will have CC'd a bunch of stuff, and hopefully your allies will take care of them. So go back to that Banshee Pulse that I touched on in a second, and I forgot to talk about, mostly because you will need the Gunner specialization to access this, and I will show actually that I have a loadout saved in this way. That's how strongly I feel about this skill. I've done that just to somewhat illustrate and remember and remind people to use this, and that is because the Banshee Pulse, same as the Jammer Pulse, has that charge up mechanic. Although it does it in a cone in front of you, it starts with a wide cone that is short and then goes into a long cone that is narrow. And it's very easy to use, especially for newer players, and it is an effect that is strong enough. It applies disorient. It is less good than blind, as I just explained, but it is still very strong, and it's very easy to use. So using this alongside your fire, but blind as well, when they stumble and such, they are easier targets to hit for your fire. That's also going to be one of the reasons why later on I will show that I use a Scorpio. Moving on, there is one more fire. Well, actually, there's two more fire skills, but I'm going to touch on this one first and move on to the next one as that is the turret, the fire turret. But I will just very briefly touch on that one because I do not recommend that one. But also, I don't really recommend the airburst. The airburst has the longest burn duration out of everything, but it is a decently long cooldown time, and it has you have to designate an area for it, as it says here, bombard area, but basically you have to target a point on the ground, and that is not always a viable thing to do. If enemies are above you and such, you cannot do that. And also, if there is a gap between you and your enemies, in many places there are the enemies are in places that you cannot reach, and that means that your skills also usually cannot reach up there, and that makes the airburst a little useless to me. It is just too hard to use in comparison for its awesome burn duration. But as with all skills, play around with them, because just as much as I like the Stinger, you may find that you like a special skill specifically. It may gel just with your playstyle, and yeah, try them all out. And that even extends beyond just Eclipse. Do it with all builds. The one skill that I've skipped over by accident is the incinerator turret, which is the fire turret. And the fire turret is just pretty bad. It doesn't have a good enough duration. Its damage is actually pretty low. Its burn duration is pretty low. Its damage and burn damage, I should say. And it's just not a very effective thing to use, especially with that long cooldown time. Even though, just like with the Hive, you can pick it back up, it still ends up being ineffective in comparison to most of the other skills. And what I also would not recommend is going two fire skills, and that is just differentiating. You cannot stack two fires on top of each other, so there's no use to going two fires in my mind for that case. I would rather and blind them and set them on fire, or and stinger them and bleed them and set them on fire, than just putting a weak fire and then a strong fire. Even though that is a tactic that we use, but I will just do that with the fire cam, as I will show in the tactics section later on. To double check that I've not missed anything, yeah, that is the skills that apply to your that can apply to your use with Eclipse. So the skills I would recommend is definitely the fire cam launcher. Learn to use this. This one is important. The Stinger is optional. This is my playstyle that really prefers this, but you can just as easily go, especially the EMP sticky. This is the shock trap, as it's also very easy to use. The jammer pulse, the banshee pulse, or the blinder firefly. Those are the skills I would recommend you at least try, just so you know how to work for when you need them, and just play around with them and see what you like. I will now move on to the weapon selection here, and you will see that I have shotguns in both slots. And if I even go to build pictures of other builds, you will see that with the exception of there having a rifle, for a very specific reason, I have all of these be with shotguns. And the reason for that is, if we go back into in-game, you can see that this all shotguns have damage to armor as their secondary attribute. So, and they have it at a value of 12. Now, damage to armor does apply to your fire, and as such, and your bleed as well, and as such is very powerful. It adds a 12% to the more dangerous enemies as well, the purples and the elites. So it is very advantageous to have this just so you can hold it in your hand. Now, you have to be cognizant that it is only active while you're holding the shotgun, not when you're holding the chem after you've swapped to the shotgun and holding the chem. You have to be physically holding the shotgun or the weapon that has the damage to armor for it to apply. So you will see me quite often fire a chem and then just release the chem, basically. Just go back to my weapon just so that damage to armor will apply as much as it can. That is actually a skill that you have to train yourself to have. And while other weapons, I might have an LMG actually, I do, with damage to armor. Other weapons will have it, can apply it as their third attribute, but whenever it's applied to a third attribute, it's only at the strength of 6. So it's 6 on all other weapon types, and it's 12 on shotguns. And therefore, shotguns are my preferred choice, with that sole exception of that rifle that you saw, which is one of the other options to use, and that's especially for its talent. But first, let me touch on this talent. This is In Sync. In Sync is the talent that I use the most, and I use it for one very specific trick, one simple trick, as something clickbaity would say, but I will show that in the tactics section, and it is a very important tool for me to have. And I feel very strongly about that. So I would also recommend that you learn that tactic and then also try to apply it. You will see me likely apply it in gameplay because it is a very strong tactic, especially elites. The other option that you saw earlier with that rifle was Perpetuation. That one was the Everlasting Gaze, which is a named Mark 17 rifle. And it has Perpetuation. Perpetuation adds, actually I should explain, In Sync first, that it adds when your skills hit a target, you get weapon damage. When your weapons hit a target, you gain skill damage. And if you do both within 5 seconds, you get both at double the value. And I mostly just use that to increase my skill damage. And again, skill damage does apply to your fires, and I use that to make my fires stronger. And in the tactics section, I will show why that is. So yeah, Perpetuation can do the same. It increases headshots, grants 50% status effect damage and duration to your next status effect, to the next status effect you apply. 50% status effect damage and duration is actually very strong. This is just on top of your damage and your duration, and has a 20-second cooldown. And that rifle that you saw was the named version, the Everlasting Gaze again, and that's what differs with that one is that this cooldown goes to 16, and that isn't really worth it. A lot of people will hunt that thing, but it is a DZ drop, so it is a weapon that comes from named caches or DZ or PvP, and as such, it is harder to get. And also, actually, I wouldn't even really recommend it, and you will see in the tactics session. But this is also then not the pistol that I usually will have in the slot, even though I have the loadout saved with it. You will see here that I have a pistol with Future Perfect, which is again also a card, to card 45, which is my recommended pistol for this because it's one of the more effective pistols. It's the highest burst, it's the second highest sustained DPS output pistol. So all of my pistols will likely either be a card 45 or TDI card customs, but a TDI card custom is of no use here. It's the skill tier pistol if you don't recognize it by its name. But I will use a card 45, and I will usually equip this pistol, and it will be with Future Perfect. And what Future Perfect does is what it does if you do not have 6 skill tiers, which Eclipse does. But just to explain that part, it adds a skill tier for 15 seconds up to 3 on kill for any build that is below 6 skill tier. But what is more important for our use is going to be weapon kills at skill tier 6 grant overcharge for 15 seconds. So this is the overcharge mechanic. And if you do not know, all of the skills have if you go into them at the bottom here, so if you go into the skill and actually inspect its stats, you can see I'm at skill tier 6, and underneath here it shows an overcharge section. this is what happens when you overcharge. And overcharge always requires an active action. It is not a 7th skill tier or anything. Some people think of it that way, but it's usually, you can see the skill tiers as something completely separate of overcharge, but overcharge usually has to be done at 6 skill tiers, as you saw with Future Perfect there. And what overcharge does is you do something, you fulfill a requirement, and at that point, you gain overcharge for some seconds, and then it goes on to a cooldown of its own. And here you can see what this isn't additive. It is additive to the initial stats. So here, when you see +6 ammo and here +6 ammo, this doesn't mean it gets 12. This means that it goes from, it stays the same basically. So one of these will apply at a time. So it's not overcharge plus tier 6, it's just these stats. And as you can see, if you look at the radius there, that is a 105% more radius. And that is 40% more burn duration and the same burn damage. So it does not increase the burn damage, but increases the radius and the duration by quite a lot. But you have to, of course, get a kill with a pistol on a skill build. That is the downside, but you can often sneak one in. And where it actually really strongly applies, I skipped out a little bit too far. Where it really strongly applies is actually with the hives. They have, as the only skill, they gain quite a large amount of skill haste when they are overcharged. And that means that the hive will basically give you a charge per second really quickly. It will also, of course, increase its damage and range and such, but I often use it when my hive is empty. I try to sneak in a pistol kill and overcharge myself, and in doing so, recharge my hive by a lot, and also give me a very easy to use fire cam for 15 seconds with, in the case of Future Perfect. There are, of course, other ways to overcharge, but I would not recommend it, and that's because, yeah, this is the recommended layout with this for Fire Eclipse. You can, of course, go other things that can overcharge, like Acosta and stuff, but that would mean giving up the vial, as you have, of course, one piece that can be an exotic. I will actually quickly also touch on that grenades are a very effective tool that you have as well. But they are, of course, locked to specialization. And in a second, we will go actually into specializations. But I just wanted to briefly touch on that. When they talk about concussion grenade for the Val, that is this value. That is the grenade you have that does not require respect. The one you have from all the way from level 1 to level 30 before you invade the capital and take it over. Before you have specializations, basically. So it's a free one, but also, of course, it does not apply any effect. What does apply effect is a incendiary grenade from Survivalist, and that is a very weak fire, but very easy to use. You have the EMP pulse from Technician, you have flashbangs, and these also should always be considered as some of your tools. And of course, Gunner has its foam grenades. Actually, I will move us over to the White House, and we will briefly touch on specializations. Having arrived here, I realized that I have not talked about actually one of the big elephants of the room, and that is what your other weapon slot should be alongside your high-end. And usually exotics are quite useful for your utility, and you can only have, of course, again, in the weapon slots, one exotic equipped. And in this case, it's going to, for me, for all builds, it's going to always be the Scorpio. There is another option that I will show you in a second, but for me, the Scorpio has too many useful things it can do that I will always go for it. So if you aren't if you do not know the Scorpio yet, it is an exotic. It's a shotgun, so it has that damage to armor bonus as well, as all shotguns do. But it applies status effects on every shot that it hits, and the duration of those effects is dependent on the amount of pellets of each shot. So the more accurate and better you hit a target, and usually that means closer to a target you are, the longer your status effects applied by the Scorpio will apply to them. But this is a really easy tool to use to apply status effects because poison, disorient, and shock are all three considered status effects. They are status effects. And this is one of the only sources of poison in the game. Disorient and shock can, of course, come from other places, but here you have it basically in a weapon slot, and you can just apply them. And even at long range, you can just tap something and hit it. And as long as the status effect gets applied to them from getting hit by even a pellet and giving a super short poison on them, the Val ticks start to triggers on them, and they start to take that 10 seconds debuff damage. So it is actually a very useful tool just for that. But in the tactics session, I will actually go into why the Scorpio is basically always lives in my second slot on all my Eclipse builds. The other option for that slot is to have, as is basically another exotic, is the capacitor. And the capacitor is, of course, an eligible option because it provides a skill damage, and skill damage increases your fire damage and your bleed damages and your initial hit damages of all of those stats, of all of the skills. And it does so with 60 skill damage, which is quite a lot. You do need to hit 40 times for that, but it's actually pretty easy to keep up. And it also gains weapon damage for every skill tier that you have. And seeing as we are a 6 skill tier build, you actually have the equivalent of 3 skill tiers worth of red cores, if you were to look at them like that. So you have 45 weapon damage, and that makes it a little easier to use for just killing stuff if you were to do it with your weapon. Now, I do not use capacitor a lot, and mostly that's down to capacitor is actually really useful solo, but Eclipse to me is not a solo build. I only, as I said many times, like I played in groups and such. And I mean that. I usually do not play Eclipse solo. I do not feel it is I'm even as confident as I am with Eclipse, I would rather be on something else where I can do a lot more direct damage, because it's very frustrating the second you run into dogs from BTSU dogs or BT dogs, or heavies, tanks. And it can be very frustrating at those points. But you can get some of that frustration out by using a capacitor. But then even solo, the Scorpio is a nice safety net to have, because you can just quickly tap a target and disorient them, or poison them, and then disorient them, and then shock them, and then they can make them take more damage as well. And yeah, that makes the Scorpio basically my choice always. You will see that also in the variants, and I will show in a second. But before we go to the variants, I quickly want to touch on the last part, and all the way on the top there you see survival is selected, and that is part of this recommended how this loadout should be for groups especially, and that is because survivalist applies group members get a 10% damage to targets with status effects. So anything that you hit with a status effect, or anybody else applies a status effect to, they get bonus damage too. And yeah, your purpose is to do status effects, so this is a good talent to have. And also the crossbow is a very effective tool, and I will show that in gameplay likely. And it gives you, of course, access to fire grenades, which is my favorite grenade to use. Now, you don't specifically have to only go survivalist. One of the choices that many go for is firewall. Firewall gives you that burn duration here, and of course has fire in the name, so of course it's meant to be. But to me, I will show in the tactics session why duration, especially for burns, isn't as important to me as some others, as they feel that you need burn duration because it's part of your damage output. If your fire lasts longer, then it can do more damage. And that is true, but I do it in a different way. The specialization shotgun, which is a sidearm slot. This is the double barrel for sidearm. This can actually has a trick with it, which I will briefly touch on here because I won't show it in tactics, is that you can hit targets that should not be able to be set on fire with, and they will be able to be set on fire then. So stuff like turrets, stuff like mini tanks, stuff like dogs can all be set on fire by hitting them with this first. Now, that fire will not spread to others inherently, so it won't spread from one dog to another unless you hit that dog before it spreads to him. It is a very cool trick, and one that sometimes you can make great use of, but for group play I will always pick survivalist, with the exception of the other one, and that is gunner. And I will actually show this build quickly here on its own because it is on my other account, so I will not swap over to it to show it. And actually, likely I will not swap to any of my other characters. I will briefly touch on all of the other variants because we are actually going on for quite longer than I would hoped for. And I'm adding to that with this rambles. You can see here that this is a gunner variant. And many people do not even consider gunner a viable choice for Eclipse. But this actually, if you're starting out, give this a try. And that is mostly down to it having a foam grenade, as you can see up there. The foam is a very small radius grenade, but it can still be effectively used at doors. And it is foam, so it is applying foam and giving you another status effect to play with. And as you can see in this case, I have the fire cam launcher and I have the Banshee pulse. Now the Banshee pulse is, again, a pulse that fires off in a cone in front of you. It applies disorient, and it's very useful, more useful than most people consider, and it's very good for heroic and blow and very easy to use, making it for beginners, my recommended skill for beginners. And also, I just want to touch upon, you can see here that I'm using a holster instead of one of the other slots. And yeah, as I said, either the holster, knee pad, or glove can be that golem piece. It does not really matter which. Here you can see that I'm using a different shotgun. The shotgun used isn't, the type isn't very important. I will always use a Super 90 or a 612. That's because of their stats. And that's usually the shotguns that I keep the most, but it doesn't really matter much. As long as it's not the double barrel, which does not have enough shots to be worthwhile. But all of the other shotguns are usable. You preferably just want to have a talent you can work with. So I'm going to show you why I pick in sync and why I would recommend it to you. As you see here, again, my golem piece has skill haste, and that this has basically the same amount of skill haste as the other build that I showed you. And to move on from there, I'm going to quickly touch on the next specialization that I do somewhat recommend, and that is Technician. And Technician is very strong against especially Black Tusk, and it does that by having the Faraday field effect. And Faraday field, any deployable skills, so this means the hive counts for this, the fire turret would count for this. None of the other recommended skills would count for this, but yeah, the turrets will count, the hives will count, remote pulse will count, and every player within 5 meters of you with this perk of the skill with from the player with this perk will become immune to shock and disrupt. And that is a very powerful thing, of course, because yeah, it's disrupt immunity. And especially with Black Tusk, there are some sections where there's just jammers that will disrupt you. Their dogs exploding and stuff will disrupt you. And you can just throw your hive at the ground. If you're within 5 meters and it deploys soon enough before the explosion of the dog disrupting you that it activates, then you are immune. And that's a very powerful tactic. And actually, I will show a variant that where I make explicit use of technician, and that is this one. And this is a bit more outlandish version, and I wouldn't recommend this starting out. As you can see, I have a backpack here, and I do not have the Eclipse backpack, as you can see. I have a backpack here that is with opportunistic, and opportunistic is a 10% debuff upon the enemy when they are shot by shotguns or marksman rifles. In this case, I have a blue core golem, so an easy piece to get somewhat. In this case, I have put status effect on it, but that makes it a lot easier to hunt for. But what this also does means that I'm giving up a lot of my damage, my personal damage, because that 30% buff or amplified damage to all status effect targets for me is now gone. But what I can apply now is that 10% to enemies. And with the somewhat recently, not this season, but last season's added names of the setup. If you had a setup with skill haste and status effect as well, so basically the same stats, you would have the perfect opportunistic. And it's not just a perfect, but it is the talent is perfect opportunistic, and that is 15%, making it a lot more worthwhile. And I am hunting for one of those, and this build just hasn't been upgraded in a while. As you can see, to give you a little bit of a behind the scenes, the shade level there is quite different than if I open up my inventory now. And that gives a little bit of an insight into how old or how long ago the build has not been updated for. Now, of course, for some builds, like red builds, that does not matter. I think those haven't been updated since I was like 8 or 9K, which is more than a year ago, likely. It is a bit of an indicator. So this build requires an update, but I just wanted to show you it because it's mostly also, so it makes it easy to have that blue core. And then I go Technician, because Technician gives one skill tier back, basically. I have an EMP grenade, and if I actually go over here, you can see it is titled Anti-BT, Anti-Black Tusk. And that's what I love this build for invaded missions. It excels in that because, yeah, I still have my fire, I still have my stinger, I am a little less damaging myself, but I can make my team do a little bit more damage. I can use tactics of the Faraday field with the hive to keep myself undisrupted. I have an EMP to disrupt the enemy, and if you hit, basically if I hit with 6 shots on a dog, it will go down due to the shock of the Scorpio, and then I can really easily get it with the EMP, making sure that it's basically down for the rest of that fight, and upon its death will spread that disrupt to everything around him. And that is a very good reason to actually use Technician. I will actually also, to complete that section on Technician, just want to briefly touch on this one, which is that you can also get a little bit more skill damage here. And you can also get the Artificer Hive, which can be useful for especially cool skills situation, because cool skills will put, when you pull out a skill, it will put the other skill on cooldown. And what that doesn't matter to is the Artificer. As long as you keep it on your back, it will give you a little bit of a buff, but it's more useful than any other skill there, just as a important thing to know, because school skills, yeah, comes up often. We shall see what the next season's directives are. Likely it won't be cool skills again, but yeah, in Summit and such, it will still be relevant. So I have touched on Survivalist as being my preferred. I've touched on Gunner as being a recommended for newbies. I've touched on Firewall for its burn duration, and Technician for its application against Black Dust especially. What I don't recommend, again, is to go Demolitionist for what some believe is a good bonus to get, which is that explosive damage, which it has here. It gains 10 explosive damage, and that is so that it applies to the vial. To me, it's not incentivized because none of the other things that it does really are needed. Its grenade is just bleed and a weak bleed. The useful things that it has are useful, but it's better used on a red build to have it alongside you. And the other one is sharpshooter that I didn't touch on, and that's also because, again, just like demolitionist, I do not recommend it really. One useful tool in here that I will actually point out is the flashbang that you get with it. And the flashbang is really nice, but it isn't worth picking a whole specialization for. If I could have the flashbang and have survivalist, or have the flashbang and have gunner, I would be very happy. And maybe that will come with the skill revamp or the specialization revamp. But that revamp is also has been talked about for years and is likely even many more years away. So having touched on all this, we have reached actually the end of the build section. I have talked for close to an hour about this build. I'm going to personally go take a short break, and actually this would be the place for you to actually also go take a break if you have listened for an hour. And we both then will be back, but for you it can be in seconds, with the tactics section. And yeah, see you in a second. And to continue into our tactics chapter, this will be a lot shorter than the previous part, as the builds, of course, require a lot of knowledge before you understand what they are and how they work. So I hope it was worth it if you went through all that. Now we'll show you a few tactics, starting off with something that I find mandatory and moving on to lesser and lesser stuff. But to start off with, I want to just show you real quickly that skills, when you look at them, have at the bottom all of their controls. And I'm specifically pointing that out because there is this little detonate at the bottom here that a lot of Eclipse players don't know. And it's usually, for me, the easiest way to differentiate between a well-advanced Eclipse player and a complete newbie. And that is that you will, for a newbie, you will see them fire the chem launcher, take out a weapon, and then fire into it, or expect their allies to shoot it. And that is because they missed a simple mechanic where if you put it on once the cloud is on the ground, if you double tap the skill button, it's on. So in my case, it's E. Double tap it and it ignites. And that is that detonate. That is basically a mandatory skill to know. There is really no advantage ever to shooting it, and you really want to get a feel for this timing, which is the fire, the cloud dissipating out, and then you igniting it. There is a little bit of a delay before it can work. What you can do is just once you fire, just tap, 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 and it will ignite likely as soon as it can. But once you get the timing down, I usually don't do that unless panic situations. But yeah, that way you can actually really easily get it on target, even leave it out and set it in ambush basically. And once the enemy runs through, you double tap and you ignite it. And there is, of course, that delay between you double tapping. So in this case, I'm going to actually voice that out in I'm double tapping now. And you saw that the ignition is 2.5 seconds later. And yeah, that is something that you have to basically get used to. Once you're used to it, it still even sometimes catches me out because it's also lag dependent a little bit. I notice that a lot when I'm playing with American friends while I'm in the EU. The latency adds to it and makes it a little bit less reliable to use. But yeah, it's one of those timing things. Get used to it. It's well worth to learn. I really recommend that you spend quite some time in play paying attention to it. Now, the second thing I want to show you is one of the things that many people don't consider is that the chem doesn't need to be a direct aim weapon, because it has a radius and of course, you see that it has that travel time, and as such, it also can bounce. When it hits a wall, it doesn't ignite on that, or it doesn't disperse its gas on that position, but it will bounce off. Same for ceilings. If I aim it at the ceiling, you can see the line is going up and the line is going down. Now, this is a very simple tactic that a lot of people don't use, and that is so I'm basically obscuring myself from them. In this case, I might be like around a corner almost, but I can still set them on fire by bouncing it off the wall. I'll be completely safe. If there was an actual play situation, I would peek out a little bit of my weapon and bounce it and then hit them. But also, especially if enemies are above you on a balcony and such, you can somewhat easily aim it at the roof above them. It will bounce down and it will ignite on top of them. It's a very easy and simple tactic once you've seen it, but it's also something that takes some time to not so much master, but more know all the places where you can apply it. There's some positions in missions where it is basically mandatory, especially for instance, if you think about the Tombs boss Parnell. When you're fighting Parnell, a lot of people will try to aim directly for him with the gas canister or with the foam. The foam you cannot actually bounce, just to make that clear. But what they will do is try to direct hit him, where you can bounce it off the roof above him and basically guarantee that you will set him on fire. Because he does nowhere to escape to. Next, I want to actually, as you may have seen already, if you look closely when I put the red upon the enemies, it might be hard to see, but in game it's very easy. It's very noticeable, especially when you are controlling it, because you will see the lines moving as you move your gas, and you see those red lines inside of my predicted firing location. Those lines indicate that there are enemies there, and those are also important to know because you can see those lines through walls and such, and it is a very good indicator of where enemies are, especially when you are obscuring yourself like I showed you. And you will see me do that in gameplay. I will really pay attention to if I see a red line, that's where I fire. The same goes for if I actually put the gas canister out. You can still see that those red lines are still there, and you can see that it is very distinctive. And especially if I wasn't seeing the enemies, I could still see those red lines and know that the enemies are there and ignite it. Next up, I want to touch on why I use InSync, which is something that more advanced players know, but I almost never see in a while. And that is that in sync, one of the mechanics of the game is that a stronger damage version of a status effect will override a lesser damage version of that same effect. So a lot of people actually believe that you can't override fires with fires, and if it's the same strength fire, that is true, but some even believe that you can't override flame grenade fires. But actually, I will show that here, how that mechanic works. So I'm going to have the flame grenade go off, and then the ignition is going off. And the ignition is the damage that is being dealt now. So it is the flame canister that was doing that damage. It wasn't actually very clear, so actually let me make this an invulnerable enemy, and I'll show you actually what I use InSync for after I basically tell you that it's that works in that way. So actually, no, let me show it outright. So you see here a fire. I'm going to, you can see the duration up there. I'm going to wait to the halfway point and then ignite that second canister that I put underneath them as well. And you can see it did the ignition damage. It did not refresh any of the burn damage or anything. But what you can do with InSync is put the canister underneath them. I'm going to take out the InSync weapon, ignite the fire. That order doesn't need to be like that. I will hit them with the InSync, make my skill damage go up, and then you can see that I overwrote the fire. And to more clearly maybe show it, I'm going to wait for this fire to go out, because I cannot overwrite it again with another stronger fire, because it was a normal fire overwritten by full InSync fire. So here I'm putting the gas canister underneath him. I'm swapping. You can do this in that in either order. You can first ignite and then swap, or either way. Once I ignite it, the skill part of InSync goes off, then I hit it and the weapon part of InSync goes off, and now I am stronger for 5 seconds, and in that 5 seconds I will overwrite that fire. And that is the reason why I do not care much for putting skill duration or burn duration on my build. That burn, if I time it well enough, will be longer than sticky, and if I really time it well, it will be stronger, longer even than the Fire Seeker, the skill that I use so little, that Airburst, that I could not even think of the name of. But yeah, so InSync is a very powerful tool, and that is especially against elites as well, because against elites, you will not usually kill them within that single fire. Reds and purples are basically your food, your fodder. And elites, and especially hounds and heavies, dogs and heavies, and mini tanks are your nemesis. They are things that you cannot easily deal with. Now, dogs in that case can be somewhat dealt with EMP, but you cannot easily kill them. And elites, especially, they have more armor and health than you will likely do in even extending 2 fires. So they are more there. They are the targets for your allies to go for. And good allies actually will usually let you deal with the reds and the purples, and they will deal with all of the higher threat enemies than that. I'm going to move on to why I picked the Scorpio. And while I can't really show it here because these aren't real enemies, I just wanted to as a standalone piece talk about this, because it might otherwise get lost if I did it in the gameplay section. And that is, on one hit, Scorpio applies that poison that we talked about earlier. And that poison, what it does on red and purple enemies, but not elites, is that it will stagger them. So they will hunch over for a second, they will do a short animation, and in that short animation, you can quite easily put a canister underneath them and ignite. Now, that does require some, for me, it is complete, I don't even think about it, it's complete muscle memory. But you can learn that as well, and it's a very powerful thing, because you just tap, hit them, fire, and well, the fire was aimed well, but targets in the range are hard to hit with fire sometimes. It's a very powerful tactic. Now, what you can do against elites is to hit them 3 times for that disorient. That will stagger all non-mechanical things, so also heavies, elites, everything like that, and of course still reds and purples. And at that 6 shots, you have that shock. That shock will stagger truly everything, including dogs, including mechanicals like turrets and mini tanks. And you can use that actually as a tool to deal with those kind of targets. And 1 shot away is that damage debuff of Scorpio. And that is also a very strong thing. So what I will usually do on stronger enemies is apply that 7 shots just to get the status on them. And I will use the Scorpio a lot as well, just to stagger reds and purples, just so I can catch them easily with fire, especially if I cannot catch them at the door and they are either I was too late, or it's a spawn that does not spawn from a door and they're a little bit more spread out, and from the first shot they will start running around. I will stagger them in that way and then catch them. You will see me do that in gameplay a lot, because that is one of those things that I do tons, and as such, it is, yeah, it will definitely come up. Same likely for the InSync. That InSync is more for that InSync tactic of refiring, which is what isn't the proper term for it, but what me and some others call it. And refiring is important as a tactic against especially elite waves. I think I have rambled on enough about tactics. I have imparted 5 pieces of it, and a little bit more just background info. And now we will move on to gameplay. I will briefly state that I'm going to basically random matchmake. I'm going to go into games, and I will just completely live narrate what is happening, and hopefully that works out well enough. I have done some dry runs, so to say, just talking out loud like a crazy person behind my computer while playing, and I feel that I probably can do it. But yes, I'm going to pause the video again, but for you it's going to be, of course, seconds, but I will see you in a few seconds. And before we actually go into that gameplay, I briefly wanted to show a trick that I know very few players know, and that is that you can somewhat see where you're headed to when you random matchmake. To do so, you come into the menu, you go into social, and in a second when I matchmake, I will show it happening, but I wanted to explain first what it will be. And that is that once I matchmake, I will, of course, receive an invite from the group leader. And I can come in here and select a name, and just as it for me shows here that I'm in Downtown West, I can click the name and see where they are. If they are already inside of the mission, then it will show the mission name, and I know exactly where we are going. If it's like here for me showing a zone, then they might be at the mission marker at the start, but they could also just be farming that zone or doing control points in that zone and matchmaking for a completely different mission in a different zone. And sometimes it will just show Haven or White House or one of the settlements, and then they are just matchmaking from the map, and you do not gain any information. But often you will see that it does show the mission or the zone that they are matchmaking in, and then you know where you're headed often. So I'm going to actually show that out now, and I always matchmake like this, so I'm very used to it. And I should actually also say that, yeah, we're only going to do heroic missions today, as that is the home of the Fire Eclipse. We will not be doing any legendaries, as that is more foam eclipse territory and a completely different intent than this video. And yeah, we will also not be doing anything below heroic, as that's just easier heroics. Yeah, and I will actually now matchmake for a little bit before prime time, so I still hope we get an instant invite, which we do. And yeah, so I escape out, I come into the social menu, I look at, I click their name and I see what mission it is. And in this case, it shows me outright that it's bank headquarters, and I will accept that, as bank headquarters is really a good Eclipse mission, actually a really good choice for me to show. So once I load in, the thing that I always do first is look at my allies, what they are, and I can guess that a little bit by their armor bars and their skills that they have equipped. I will also kind of look if they are in a clan together, if they have similar names, that they are like friends, or if they are... and also I will also kind of look at the SHD levels. That will give me a little bit of information, but actually the SHD level is the least important thing and the least valuable info giver. I will move up here with my team. We are a 4 full man. The skills are a little bit weird, but I'll actually inspect them in a second before I go down the elevator, likely. I did catch the boss. I did not catch any of the enemies, which is actually good. So I want these enemies to move out. And I want the enemies to be in positions basically where my allies can shoot them. If my allies cannot shoot them, it's only my fire hurting them, which the boss kind of is there. But I would rather my fire deal a little bit damage and CC them basically, and my allies to deal with them. So here you see me throw that hive at this heavy, and there's a very specific reason for that. So he's completely aggro to me because I've done a ton of damage to him now. So even he did not even get the chance to fire, but even if he did, he would fire towards me, and that would leave my allies open. And I can deal with having a heavy shoot at me. I will just take cover, or I even with my Scorpio, I can chain him, which is shooting the ammo belt that is going to the weapon. I have actually ran Banquet Coders today with this character, so but I will still kind of show to you towards some of the loot positions, because also, yeah, I think that that might also be worthwhile to show. Here, the trigger point is a little bit further, so yeah, that it was nice of that player to wait. I could have actually put this canister out a little bit earlier, but if it wasn't clear, I am playing and talking at the same time, and that does make me a little bit worse. There is a heavy in this group. Everything else I will likely kill. So everything else is going to die to my fire, to my hive that I tossed up there. The heavy will likely be completely focused on me as well, and that leaves my allies all the room to just deal with them. And that's also an important thing to point out as well, is that I will take aggro of a lot of stuff. And you have to be cognizant of that as the Eclipse player. And it's very nice for the Reds in the group because, yeah, they can fire at stuff while it is not paying attention to them. If they focus fire something, they will likely take the attention back. But yeah, often you can kind of use yourself as an off tank almost. And it is very obvious, especially in events like global events as SHD Exposed, how much aggro you pull from enemies. So yeah, here earlier you saw me looking towards one of my allies that I actually, yeah, I cannot loot anything because I've looted everything today. I did a few practice runs earlier just to test my setup, and everything seemed to be going well. So this will likely be the first setup that or the first gameplay clip that I show. So here you see me toss my hive there. We're going to set up here. One of my allies hopefully goes for, so two are going. The third one especially should not leave. I want at least one person to be with me. That third placement is quite bad, especially for an 8K. You do not want your turrets ever to be on the ground, especially not just in the middle there, because also it does not have line of sight out of either door. And it actually, if I just go here and stand, you can see how little it can fire at. That is a horrible placement. Just to give you some, that's going to be heavy. I'm going to actually shoot it with a crossbow bolt. If you're not aware of it yet, crossbow bolts deal heavy damage to armor plates. So that his armor plate, especially on an elite and such, will just completely pop off the second my crossbow bolt, not when it hits him, but when it explodes, it will take that chest off, or the position that I hit off. I am a little peeved that one of our allies, who is 13k, is staying all the way in the back. They should not do that. They should move up to here. There is absolutely, especially with an Eclipse here, we will hold them here. Even if I was here all the way alone, the only thing that would give me a little bit of issue would be that heavy. The rest of this is completely not an issue. And I'm staying up there. So actually in between here, between the areas, I'm going to have a quick inspect. That wasn't, these aren't choices that players of these levels should make, but they are enough, especially for an easy mission like banks. They are good enough for me to carry, and I kind of have to carry them, it seems. But this is still a really good mission for me to show, because there are a lot of Eclipse tricks in here that also actually are applicable to other other builds as well. And yeah, we are just basically waiting out the timer, killing all of these waves. Once the last wave is done, I'm going to actually go loot. If all 4 players of us would go through those doors before the timer runs out, we will fail the mission. So I will never leave that, especially not in match group, because 3 others might follow me, and then we would fail the mission. So I will always wait that timer out. And here, yeah, we create a hole, and we go down this corridor. We will have that one hyena who will always have the worst time, and yeah, you don't have to hit that vent. If you didn't know, you can just or that valve, you can just go through the fire. It's so much faster. The only times to not do that is when no regen is active, but there are actually tricks for no regen. So here I'm just going to play with them a little bit, and we have to wait for our allies anyway. I check here if I need a medkit. I do. I don't really. So the boss fight might get a little bit messy, so I'll go here, grab a medkit. I'm not the last one here anyway, so why not? So for this next room, there's going to be 2 big waves, and this is basically... this will show why I run this build the way that I do. There is a chest in this toilet back there that these players, one player knows, the other 2 don't. So I will move in here. I will put it onto those 2 reds. I always just quickly check, are they reds? I prefer to have reds. If my allies were a bit more competent, they would kill those enemies as the first ones. Here I wait for that door to open so I can bounce it off of it, and that is the second wave of here. And you saw me toss my hive across. The only thing that will survive here is that heavy again. So that is a real easy clear for here. I'm going to crossbow bolt him. They destroyed his chest before the crossbow bolt even went off, so it didn't really assist. But what it did do is put a bleed on that heavy. And that bleed will make it so because I am survivalist, so my allies do gain 10% to stay disaffected enemies. And I wanted to also point out so that group bonuses like those are only for your group, so they are not for yourself. They only apply to them. And in raids where you have 2 groups, they only apply to the group that you are in. They do not apply to both groups. So I'm going to... I was a little bit inconfident because on the minimap I saw one ally moving up a little bit towards my right arm, and that makes me hesitant to fire a canister because I could hit the back of his head and kill myself, as it will basically then drop at my feet. And if my allies are firing, and if I'm firing a canister, there are likely enemies, so they are likely to fire, then yeah, I will have a bad time, because if you get caught in your own fire, you will die. You have a lot of status effect, and your health kit does not apply to you when it's something that you do to yourself, in the same way as if you toss a grenade at your feet, you will die from it. Here you will see me do a trick that actually I have never seen anybody else do except when I teach them, and that is that you can toss. So that is the boss arena that we're going to head into in a second. And as you saw, I tossed my hive already in there. What that is going to do is make that initial wave all bleed and take damage from me. I'm going to wait on the minimap. I'm looking where my allies, so that they are heading in a little bit. You saw me put down 2 canisters into the boss room as well. And hopefully, and those are positions that I somewhat know enemies will spawn in. And once all allies are in here, you see already my hive is going. You see my fire trigger, and everything is aggro to me now. So all of my allies should have an easy time getting in position. I do not. And there's a heavy in the middle, which is my least favorite thing to have happen here, and that will cause me to have a hard time getting out of here. I'm going to stay in this hive range here for a second, get myself healed up. In the right side, you saw me go for a shield. And I do that because I know that shields will not move fast, and they will not roll, so they will not get out of my fire. So shields are a really good target for you. I move up a little bit. I see that my hive is somewhat recharged. I'm going to toss it there just to pull aggro from the boss. So here again, I'm going to not so much focus the boss, I'm going to focus on the ads, but I do want to get some damage on the boss because I might pull aggro from him. You see me also put a fire that way because nothing else would survive anyway. I am going to use a crossbow bolt here, so this may seem weird to some players, as specialization weapons do have less damage to named enemies, but what it still does is it is my strongest option against that heavy, as a heavy boss, and it still does deal that heavy damage to armor plates. So I use it there to deal with him. It's on named enemies, it will not pop it off in one go, but what it will do is heavily damage that piece. And you saw he went down pretty quick, and my allies still likely deal good damage, but actually looking at it, I will go into here, you will see that, yeah, this was basically my mission, even though I joined 2 rooms in, I believe. I joined just before the first boss fight. They did not stand a chance against the way that I am dealing damage here, because it's a lot of squishies, and hyena missions are always like that a little bit. It was also really fast. I'm actually just going to quickly check what I have here, grab everything. I will still grab all resources, because resources to me are very valuable. And I actually just want to also, yeah, showcase the build again. So yeah, this was that baseline build that I was talking about. You saw me use the Hive extensively. You saw me use the Chem Launcher extensively. I did not use flame grenades or my pistol or my in-sync, because this is a lot faster paced mission, and I did not need to. You also saw me use the crossbow effectively against heavies to pop off their chests. And in a second, I will come back with the next piece of gameplay. And before we head into that next piece of gameplay, I actually wanted to show the build here first that we're going to run for it. And this is that Banshee Pulse variant that I showed you, that I really recommend to newer players, as a Banshee Pulse is a really easy skill to use. And that makes it really great for newer players, as you can do it, it applies a good status effect, and you can use it through walls, so you can play it pretty safe. It makes it easy for you then to apply the fire cam to them, and as such, it's a really good starter variant, so I wanted to show it here. And to make it, I've basically remade a normal Eclipse. I've, as I said before, that specific build is on my other account, but I've remade it here quite easily by just making a normal Eclipse and equipping the minigun. And the minigun has given me access to that Banshee Pulse, so I can use it. It has also given me access to the Riot Foam Grenade, but the Riot Foam Grenade has a really small radius. It makes it quite difficult to use, but I will try to use it perhaps here and there in the gameplay. And I also want to touch on, so as I said in the build section, if you are starting out, you could replace this piece with either a Wyvern or a Hanayu, and especially as this is basically more of a starting version that I would recommend, you could, with this one, really go for Hanayu, especially because that has skill haste as the first brand bonus, and it is recommended to do that one instead of Wyvern, because it applies to both of your skills, as the Banshee, of course, does deal no damage. So I am giving up a significant portion of my damage, but I'm gaining good, easy to use skill, especially for newer players. And that means also that at least if you're playing and you learn at least to use the Banshee a little bit, then you're putting CC on enemies, and that will be enough to get through most content. And then your allies can just deal with them. But yeah, you could have a Hanayu piece, and the Hanayu piece is recommended there because it, for newer players, it is less strong than the golden piece, but because it is instead of status effect, it will be skill haste and not first brand bonus, but drops with yellow cores. So you would have this yellow core that needs to be recalibrated for golden again. That would just be a skill tier, so you just need to have one good stat, and then you can put another stat alongside it, and then you're fine. And again, it could be any of the 3 slots that I said before. Having rambled on about that a little bit, let me actually, I wanted to show how I matchmake again. Just I want to bang that one home because, a lot of people don't know, and I'm just going to keep repeating it till everybody knows. So yeah, I'm going to run the matchmaking, and we're a little early in the afternoon, but hopefully we still get an instant invite, which took a second, but we still got one. And again, I escape out, I go into the social menu, I select the name, and I see that we are headed to the Tombs. The Tombs is actually an interesting mission, especially for Eclipse, as likely, depending on how early in the mission we are, I'm going to swap skills a lot. So we are past the first room. I see that now. And again, as always, I look at what my allies are. So I see the ally that has loaded in does not have any blue cores. Their layout of their skills with a shield, I'm going to guess, especially with how little armor they have, is going to be a red build, likely. The second one loaded in as well, no armor cores, and both of them, both of the ones that I've loaded in. So all three players have the values I would expect there to be when there are no armor cores. And you can learn that one as well. That drone, once I had the shock on him, he was already dead. He just needed the shock needed to run its course before it dies. And yeah, all three are likely to be red builds, especially because I have well, one has a revive hive, one has a healing hive. I just now actually noticed. Their SHDs are like not in the single digits. Single digit players, yeah, it's difficult to get good builds together at such low levels. Here I'm going to actually inspect them. So I was wrong about one player. I wasn't wrong about this player. And oh, actually, yeah. So we have one full red and in a striker, and we have one non-build, and we have one future initiative. Actually, that is a well-placed grenade. I'm actually also going to join them on that with that. I am actually, so here you will see me put my canister on these heavies, and that's because I want their aggro again. So I'm basically taking attention away from my allies by putting quite a lot of damage and a lot of my focus on them. But that is fine. You saw in the background my foam has actually spread out. There is no other player that has a foam skill, so I know it's my foam. Yeah, most of these enemies are dead, and I'm just keep shooting that heavy just to reapply especially disorient and shock to them if I can, and also that damage debuff. And I put myself in a position as well that I am a clear shot for my ally that is a future initiative. I'm now going to actually put their name basically in my head, and that is just so in the future I actually will look around and I will see where they are, and I will try to put myself in a position that that I'm easy to heal for them. And that is a little bit more advanced maybe than most would need. You don't need to do that, but I enjoy playing as a very advanced player to be aware of my allies more than anything. I'm usually also as well the person somewhat coordinating people on where to go and what to do. So I am quite used to having to deal with where people and such are. So I actually missed with that spawn. I'm setting up for the second spawn. It's not happening. Yes, just caught it in time. I caught it a little bit early. That heavy is up there, and you can see because I had the fire out and it ran its course on him a little bit. Up until the point that the striker player focused him, he was fully focused on me. In a second, I will swap to Jammer Pulse as soon as this. So I will here swap to Jammer Pulse, and that is I'm going to kill or I'm going to let my allies kill this first wave. There's going to be two waves. The first wave is just drones. The second wave is going to be drones and enemies, and that's a much more dangerous wave. And I don't have the cooldown speed to deal with both waves. So I'm going to choose to do it with the second. I'm going to try to get a shock on this enemy here, and hopefully my allies will kill it. They did not, but I did catch a future perfect there, as you saw. And I'm going to use that future perfect here to do that, to put the fire there. And basically, that first wave was a bit more difficult because I did not help really with dealing with it. But I made sure that I saved it for the more difficult wave, which was that second one. And that fire will not refire him, but it was just more damage. And I do have enough canisters. I know we are going to be heading into a long corridor, basically, with a long wait for the door. So I was just more damage on him a little bit. I could have used the in sync there, but yeah, talking and playing together, that it is actually more difficult than I thought as well. So it is taking a little bit of my mental capabilities, but that's fine. And I'm going to actually here wait for my allies and swap back to the Banshee. I'm going to use the Banshee in this next room again. But more especially towards the latter parts of this, I will likely actually swap back because I've showcased this variant of it a little bit likely by that point. I'm going to likely swap back to that anti-BT variant, and that's just for the EMP grenades and such. And the EMP is a very strong skill for the latter parts of this mission. So I'm going to rush in, set something on fire, go over here, line it up a little bit so I get everyone with the Banshee Pulse. Here I'm going to actually refire on them. So there you saw me use that refire trick. I didn't actually pay attention if I actually did refire them or not. But here again, I put myself in a position where I kind of expected my healer to be. I'm just going to run into their hive actually, so that's make it easy for them. But yeah, I usually go out of position, but I always try to keep in mind where my healer and such is, and that's because I am used to playing a healer. I'm used to playing Eclipses and such. I'm used to playing a lot of builds, and that makes it so that I know how they play. And I would recommend that as well if you want to go further in your journey with Division. To learn a lot of the builds and know what they do and how they play, because then you know what other people are doing when they are doing it. Here I'm going to swap to the Blinder Firefly. This is what I mean for this mission. I will swap skills quite a lot, and that is because I will in this there is two heavies and one rusher that will spawn here with a 4-man, and you see them come out there, and I'm going to blind both of them. And actually what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run across, put a fire on them, hope this lady dies, and it's quite likely that so either they keep pointing their guns towards my allies, or they aggro towards me and turn their backs to my allies. Either way, they're getting shot in the back. There, I'm going to shoot that. Come in here, hit this laptop. That will open that door across from me where that key chest is, and I will actually, have a look in here. There was actually a somewhat lower level player, so I will take that sniper rifle that has max damage, and I'm going to share that with them. Once we get up this elevator, I will swap back to jammer pulse, and that's for that first wave of drones in here. Drones can be really annoying to shoot and quite damaging, so yeah, I will just take them out. I do not need the blinder or the banshee here really. I might actually swap back, but I also want to have the jammer pulse for one wave after. So here I run in, it comes out of its setup phase. There's always when you swap a skill, it has a little short setup phase. I'm waiting for my allies to move up a little bit before I hit this button, just so they are not way out of position. And I know that they spawn from that door, and you will see me take care of them. I see that my, excuse me, that my jammer has come out of its cooldown, so I'm actually going to swap back again. I know that that wave somewhat spawns around that time. I did not catch anyone. I am actually going to, so I'm spraying in there with my Scorpio, and then what I was doing there is just staggering them, trying to catch something for me to then set my chem on. And here again, I'm putting him in the ignite. The drone will also likely compete with aggro because it has proximity on him. And here for this last wave is actually why I grabbed this Banshee and why I have actually saved it and not used it. As this wave spawns over here, I will do that to them, because often there is a heavy in here with a 4-man. So I don't have the crossbow here to deal with him, but that's fine. My allies are doing actually pretty decent damage. Most of that's going to come, well, almost all of it is going to come from that striker player. I have not heard an ACS go off, but I do hear a vector, so they are likely running a vector, and that's good enough. ACS is better. So here I'm swapping back to this jammer again, but yeah, so ACS is better, of course, a lot better for stacking, but we are going on fast enough, even with me not being on my highest damage variant. And I've swapped to that jammer, as I said before, for this build. I'm going to have him open the door, and yeah, this is a non-wave, where it can actually usually be a little bit annoying. You can also use the demolitionist grenade launcher very effectively there. I misjudged what the cooldown there was. I want to swap now back to the Banshee, because I'm going to use that Banshee again. And in the room before the boss, I've already decided now in my head that I am going to swap to that anti-BT variant. And maybe I should showcase what it can do, and even not against BT. Here I will usually go down here because people go all the way up, but there is actually a position I wasn't confident of. Ooh, I might actually go down here from the bleed, but I did not. My healer is doing a good job. I will go up here. This is the position that I like. And one of the things that I also would recommend you do is when you can have a height advantage over enemies, especially on Eclipse, but just even on Reds, there is no reason not to take it. Here we will go towards the boss wave. I will actually try to time that, and I kind of did. So there you saw me use foam. That foam will of course also spread just as all of my other status effects do. So I'm going to try to catch the boss here. What I will do is go for this shock. It did not trigger because there's another Scorpio user in this group, so I wasn't cognizant of that to that point. But yeah, that made that a real easy fight. And yeah, likely by the end screen it will show that yeah, that striker player is doing a pretty good job. He's keeping his stacks up and he's doing all the damage I need others in my group to do. As yeah, I have less capabilities now even to deal with heavies because yeah, I do not have that crossbow, which I would have used there. But instead I foamed them in place for my allies. They were a little bit far back, but that's okay. Also, I actually now notice that yeah, that's striker build is also on the other higher level player. There I go and shoot that lock. I will take a left here. This ally knows it as well. Yeah, there's a key there that will be opening grate a little bit later on. Go here, grab the loot. I usually always loot. There is, and as you see, I'm not picking anything up really. I'm just deconstructing them on the ground. And that's for the materials, 4 of them. So I'm taking an eye towards how many foam grenades I still have. I still have 2. These allies are very nice and waiting. But yeah, I want them to open the door so I can rush through like I did there. Here is one of the issues that the Banshee would have and why I'm not using it towards enemies below there. You saw me focus on one enemy basically. But the Banshee, if I use it up here and the enemies were down there, it would not reach. It has a very narrow height difference that it applies to. There I tried to direct impact, but I did not aim well at all. Here I'm waiting for that enemy to come out of fire. It wasn't well aimed. It wasn't a good hit. Waiting for this wave. I would usually, so this would be again, my hive would be there if I had it. Catching those enemies. Going to put it on him. He's almost dead anyway, but I'm likely still to gain some aggro on him if that happens. And I'm always keeping an eye out for where my healer is and where his hive is. If I need to, I'm not really going to use med kits. I'm just going to run back into his hive. And he's doing a good enough job keeping me up. And yeah, the future initiative buff is quite strong. And it is quite effective. It is applying total skill damage to me. I will actually take that and share it just in case, because it has a full third stat and those are usually harder things of your library to get, so maybe that 390 player needs that one. There is shock runs ahead. There is a key chest on the left. My ally is going for the key chest. Hopefully we stack up here again. We wait for everyone to be together before we head in, even though they did not. So here I'm actually just going to do this real quick just to CC a little bit. I'm going to set a fire out. I'm going to go over here, make sure I have my pistol equipped, and then grab the shock runs. I want my shock runs to go into my pistol slot. There I'm going to actually refire with them. I did actually not succeed, so likely I had a future initiative up before I did that and then not. Ooh, I should have swapped here already actually to a jammer pulse. I will do that after I set this wave on fire. Oh, actually, here's a good spot. Maybe I will go in here. and then swap to a jammer pulse. I'm safe from the turrets. I'm safe from the... Everything's on fire next to me. The setup time of the jammer pulse happens, and I jammer that turret over there, and I set up myself in this position to catch that wave, even though I did not really. They got out, but that's fine. The turrets are gone already. The only thing that's really going to remain is that heavy over there. And yeah, after this wave, I will actually swap to that anti-BT version, because jamming is going to be very powerful in this coming room, and that will give me access to jamming grenades as well. So this is actually the build as it would normally be on this character. I am not going to keep the hive. I am going to go to a jammer pulse as soon as it comes out of its setup time. And we're going to head in here. And yeah, so you did see the Banshee a little bit. It will not be shown from this point onwards. I am going to be jammer pulsing the whole time till the end from here. And this is actually a place where an Eclipse can make this fight very easy, as I will show in a second. I'm good on ammo. I will still grab it if somebody pops it. We'll wait for everyone to stack up. You will see me here use the jammer pulse. I'm using this because all of these decoys still do give XP if I kill them there, as you see there. And Parnell, for his first appearance, will always be in Charlie on all difficulties in story and everything. So you see others firing at other places. That means that they do not know that. He will always be in Charlie. And I'm just going to go back here and set up here. One thing you will actually see me do is pop that. And that is just, I'm going to take cover around that position a lot. So I didn't see which turret it is coming up, but I'm going to pulse it. I'm going to try and catch that wave. I didn't do a good job there, and I was a little bit confused where my canister went for a second, but I think it went into the door and they got out of it real quickly. There's a wave behind me as well, and I hope they dealt with the turret. I do not see any markers in weird positions on my mini-map. Where the turrets would also still show up. But yeah, we just deal with them that way. And I'm not playing perfectly, but that is fine. I'm doing more than enough to deal with it. And again, I'm going to jammer pulse here a little bit for to take out the decoys, but also to kill them and get the XP from it. And there's actually still a farming method that kind of exists, but it used to be very effective for farming expertise, but that is no longer the case. They have changed it. Here we will have the rogue agent again. So I'm looking around. I can usually spot him just from where he is. I didn't, and I'm just going to jam now. Ah, he was in Foxtrot. I looked at there first, but he wasn't moving yet. So there, I set him on fire. Hopefully my allies deal with him a little bit. He will likely spawn one more time. So the mechanic here is he will keep doing this till we do enough damage to him. And okay, so whenever there is even an effect on him, that can only be the real one. I'm going to save my jammer pulse, and that is for... Oh, actually, I was expecting a turret there, but but I'm saving it, yeah, for... I was expecting a turret and this wave, but I'm saving it for this wave mostly. Ah, we have also, yeah, and he's back to take some more damage. He was... in there, up there, and yeah, I know that is a heavy just by how high that the triangle above his head is. So Parnell is still spawning. I'm looking for him. I do not see him. I'm going to jammer pulse instead. And I took his decoys out, but I did not catch him. And that means, yeah, that he was either in Bravo or in Foxtrot, is that called, right? Echo. Yeah, we'll just slowly deal with him. I'm waiting for my jammer pulse to come off. Here I shouldn't actually use it because the next thing is a turret. I do know that. But I'm going to shock him as well because that will make him stand up. Here we will have turrets again, and I am off cooldown. But actually what I can do is... throw that, throw that. Actually, oh, this is not the wave that I expected us to be at. Oh no, it is the wave that I expected us to be at. But yeah, so here I will actually jammer pulse again and try to catch that. So you saw there that because it was elite, he jumped out of it real quick. So elites evade a lot better than normal enemies. So that turret is coming back up and my ally is in its range. So I'm tossing a grenade there. It will not save him, but it will make it so that we can go get him in a second. I was very confident there of my positioning of the camp, so I hesitated way too long. But that's okay, because we are basically done with this wave. There's only that thing left, but that thing doesn't also not need to die. Hey, you're seeing me apply opportunistic to stuff. Oh, actually, his boss is still existing. Okay, so yeah. And here again, now Parnell spawns out, and me doing that causes it to become crystal clear where he is. I'm just going to tap around, and that's me applying opportunistic to everything. I'm going to get that enemy. So one decoy survived, but the other one is going to be Parnell over there, and I'm going to fire at this wave. I didn't do it well, but well enough to... So there you saw me use a very weird tactic. I wouldn't recommend it, but I know that elites will really prioritize jumping out of a chem. So either there, so you saw me fire at him even though I was in it, and so either he was going to roll away, and even if one of my allies shot it before, because I was out of it before he was, and that would cause him, that would cause me to die if both of us were still in there, but also he would die because he's in there and he will take that damage as well. And yeah, it isn't a recommended tactic, but no, it was the last enemy of the last wave. I'm okay dying. Like, I'm not going to be pissed off to doing that, and that was a tactic because I was likely to die otherwise anyway, because I had run out of Scorpion rounds. I had to reload, so it is a panic tactic almost. And yeah, we shall actually look. We shall see that the damage count is to that striker player. He helped me carry it. We carried it together. I could not do the max damage, likely as I have one CC skill and not two damaging skills as I normally would have. But yeah, we did it in a pretty decent time, and I'm going to now take us into the last piece of gameplay, which is going to be about the build that I briefly showed but didn't really talk about, but I want to actually run it, so I will see you right about now. And here is that build, and as you can see, not much has actually changed. What has changed is that the golden piece that usually lives in the glove, knee pad or holster slot has moved to the chest now. And in doing so, of course, I have lost the chest talent of Eclipse, which would increase my on-kill range of my status effects transferring from 10 to 15, and the amount of the duration that gets transferred from 50 to 75%. I've lost that now. And that is quite a lot of my ability to CC, but I'm giving that all up to gain Glass Cannon. And Glass Cannon, Glass is a very powerful talent, as all damages I deal are amplified by 25%. And that will increase my damage by a lot, especially as I still have the backpack as well, which has the 30%, although this has the requirement of stuff being status affected before that 30% applies to them. But of course, most of the things that I will be hitting are status affected by me, or are my status effects to begin with. So the two of them together are very strong. As also, yeah, Glass does not have any requirements. It's all damages I deal. And yeah, it's applying to everything: my vial, my weapons, of course, my status effects, and very importantly also, it applies to that initial hits, especially for like the ignition of the fire cam and the initial hit of the stingers. And yeah, so it makes this a very high damage variant. And that also makes it a really good candidate for the capacitor, as the capacitor with its increased skill damage would synergize really well with this, because of course it is increasing that damage even more. It is pretty in line with the thinking of this build. And another thing that is a good candidate for this build is actually to put firewall here, because that duration that gets transferred here is of course getting well, it's not getting reduced, but I don't have the chest to increase it anymore, so it is less than with the other builds. And yeah, that little bit more extra duration at the start would offset that by a little bit, and would be noticeable. But I am staying with Survivalist, mostly because I still want to have the crossbow. I still want to have the fire grenades, as I will use them more on this build just to keep enemies in their spawns, as I have to play it a lot safer. And I also still want that damage bonus to my allies. Actually, I should touch on the point that I have to play it safer because all damage I take is also amplified, and by 50%, so double the amount even. And that means that this plays quite differently, so I would like to showcase that a little bit. And that also means that, yeah, in 2 or 3 hits, I will drop all the way down to my health gauge, so I have to play it, I can't play it as aggressive as I did with the others. I will keep for the rest of the slots basically the same. And yeah, I will also keep the Scorpio, and that is more down to me a little bit, because I also like having those CC options still. To me, it is very handy to have the same talents and weapon types across all of my Eclipses, because I played it on several characters, of course. And for me, it's handy to, when I press a button, that I know what I get. And here, when I know I press my first weapon button, I will get a in-sync shotgun with all of my builds. And when I press my second weapon button, it will be a Scorpio. And I like having that, especially as I'm, of course, going to narrate again. And I'm going to now go matchmake, and I will join you as soon as I'm starting to load in. So here I have matchmake. I've used that trick. I know we're headed to American History Museum, which is a really nice mission for this build, especially. Yeah, as always, the second I load in, so they have cleared the first room. They have a few armor bars. Them having a revive hive tells me that they're likely on a weapon build, a red build, and I'm going to move in and try to assist them. I did not catch anything on fire there, but that's okay. I'm going to toss my hive over and clear it out here. We're still in 2-man scaling, so everything is very easy to kill. I'm going to push up here, get the objective, open our access to the door. I will actually use this moment to inspect him, and they are an Umbra, but they are also not the best Umbra. So I will keep that in mind. They will deal some damage, but they won't be the greatest. I will push into the back here. There is a chest back here that he has already looted today in this session as well, and yeah, that tells me that he's probably tried this mission before today. I will in a second actually go on the map and see if... So I'm getting shot in the back there by my ally. For a second I was confused what was shooting me. We'll go here, grab this key. In a second I will actually go to the map. What is the loot allocation here? Seska. Okay, so that tells me what they are hunting for. And yeah, I will keep an eye out for Seska parts to share with them. We have another person joining. Until they load in, you cannot see their armor bars. You get that long bar there. But I will actually check if they have not looted here. So I always go down this escalator because I will grab these resources and I will grab this chest. And yeah, that's why I go down the wrong one, so to say. I will grab that. I will share it with them. Didn't have really good stats, but actually that is a weapon that a lot of people forget that is really good for newer players, and that's because it doesn't have, you won't have all the mods and such. So actually those kind of weapons where it has a 50 mag round by standard is actually a little bit useful for newer players. So yeah, we have gotten our 2 allies. Both of them have revive hives. One of them has 1 armor core, the other has 0, and that tells me that, yeah, they're likely red builds, and also with their skills, those are common skills for red builds to use as their little CC alongside their revive hive. I will actually inspect them as well, of course, in a second. I am not doing a good job I missed that one as well, as I did not actually recognize exactly where he was. He was a bit further back than I thought he was. And yeah, you see a little bit of the transference issues that this build has, as uh, yeah, everything it's not spreading out as far, but what may be actually less noticeable is how much more damage I am doing. And for me it is very noticeable, but yeah, and keep an eye out on the damage numbers on the right side when they pop up, as yeah, you can compare them directly and see that they are a lot higher, but well, 25% higher. We know the exact value by having glass. As the rest of the build, of course, stat-wise is the same stat still. That item does not have a chevron. I will not actually go check what it is. So we're moving up here. I see that I don't have many chems left, so I will not actually use a chem early. I will put my hive there to catch a wave later on, as I know that I can't really use it for this wave anyway. I will actually toss a fire grenade in the back here and try to conserve somewhat of my chems. I will not, because I want the sniper gun, but I only used one chem. So where I would, if I had enough chems, I would do two, one on that and one in the back more. I will hope that my allies take care of that wave. I will actually go for that wave. I should have actually tossed grenades, but yeah, the downsides of talking and playing at the same time. So you see that wave in the back there, that's getting dealt with my hive, as a lot of players do what he does. They run in there and put their back towards there, and this makes it a lot easier for that. This makes it so that even if they do that, it will end up fine, because yeah, those enemies back there are getting CC'd just by my hive being there. And yeah, here again, I will actually toss a fire grenade this time while I'm remembering it now. And yeah, so everything walking out will have that fire effect. Everything on the other side you see is heavily damaged. That red is basically dead, so is that elite now. And I forgot that that was my own fire grenade, and I will go down here. Yeah, this is the downside of glass. So normally that would not, what I did there would not be an issue. I can actually, even with very low armor, I can run through my own fire. I'll be on fire for a few seconds, but there glass increased that damage, and I had forgotten that there was glass. So it was my own mistake. But yeah, while it doesn't put me in the best light, I'll keep that in just to show you that. I will go over here and see if he has looted this chest. He has not, and I will pop it. My allies, when they move past here, so that is the corridor that leads into the boss, they can grab it then. Actually, if I get it here, I will show it. Yes, so you can jump down there. You don't have to take the ropes. This all has been looted, so I will not pay attention there. Yeah, I'm going to try and catch up with my allies. And yes, I did go for loot, and they are rushing, but it's also fine. This is not a hard mission. And here as well, I will go to the side, because likely even if this group leader has looted this mission, they do not know this, and someone else did. And again, I will quickly check the stats. I also saw that I'm full on one resource. Here, there's a heavy in the back there. I will set them on fire. I will put Scorpio rounds on them just to get that debuff on there. And from how long that took to take down, I will actually inspect my allies real quick. And I know that they aren't very good damage dealers. This one should be, but they are more in a raid setup. And yeah, so likely I have one good damage dealer with me. I will set that down there. I will hopefully catch someone. I did not actually. Aim that a little bit better. Take my time with it. Yeah, I did set an elite on fire. But they should still all die. I will check if it's that door, because that door will be the only reason for me to care. But because the other ones will be further down, and I'm pretty safe from there. And yeah, I did not intercept that. I'm just going to actually just put Scorpio rounds down, and that fight is over. 3 of my allies are aiming at one person. And they are messing with each other, as one person once ally ran past the backpack there. He shot it while it was on the ground and inactive. But yeah, you can do that actually. You can still shoot weak points while they are on the ground and annoy your allies with that with it that way. I'm going to push up. I'm going to put a canister back there, try to catch as many enemies as I can, and I'm going to put my hive down there as well. I'm going to go up here. The sun is very much obscuring my vision on the right side, but I will just have to deal with that. So these waves are coming out. We will have the boss in a second. What I will do for the boss actually is put a flame grenade up there. I'm going to put a flame grenade up there, and I'm going to put a flame grenade down there. And that's basically all of the spawn points. And I will try to actually hit that enemy. I will try to get a spread going here off of that enemy. I do not actually even check if I succeed. I'm just moving on to others. And yeah, so here I will not get... So the boss, even that distance from there to there was already too much for the transference I've lost. I'm going to toss a hive out again. I'm trying to jump down, and the game sometimes does not agree with you with what you're trying to do. And I couldn't really easily. And yeah, so here I'm going to try to catch something on fire. I do, and a good target as well, because they will die real easily. And we are done with this mission.
No more contact. All clear.
And while it was a little bit messy, yeah, I showed you how big of a damage difference, hopefully. Well, I didn't really show it, but hopefully you did notice how big of a damage difference it is. And even though this was a somewhat easier mission, I will likely be top damage. And that is, yeah, down to all of my fires just spreading out. Everything is very compact, and I can deal with that pretty well here, where yeah, on larger missions with way open areas. So this is the only really open area in this mission. And yeah, I will actually join you in the conclusion in a second. And to conclude this likely very long video, I don't yet know how long it's going to be all put together yet, but I'll venture a guess that it's close to 2 hours or a little bit over. And in there, I hope you have found at least some information that was useful to you in how to lay out the builds and what skills I use and what skills I recommend and what weapons I use and recommend. Some of the tactics, of course, I've shown you. And especially I hope that the gameplay was somewhat useful and informative, as that is the part that I feel is often missing with Division 2 content, as a lot of people will talk about builds and how to make them and how to put them together, including myself. But nobody really goes into how to play builds and how they think while they're playing it and such. So I hope there is some value to what I did there. And if you liked it, or even if you disliked it, I would love a comment and some feedback on what you did like or didn't like, and what you would like to maybe see changed, or advice, or even what future builds you would like to see. As yeah, that is to me still the most valuable thing of feedback. And I already have some future projects in mind which is another masterclass on another build that I run quite a lot, my second most run build. And I also have some concepts in mind for some shorter videos, which will be easier for me and also easier for you to watch, with a lot less information, but still hopefully enjoyable, and still hopefully enough info in there that they will be worthwhile. And I'm going to now close off this long and rambly video, and thank you again for joining me on this little YouTube journey that I'm going on. And I hope that you will join me as well in the future for other videos. Have a good night.